Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank, in the beginning, the kindness invitation to be here. It's an honor to be here in Oxford Union. I want to first of all, give special thanks to Mr. Guilherme Cavalcanti and Mr. Michael Lee, who brought me this invitation. My presentation here is about systemic corruption in Brazil and how, in the so-called Operation Lava Jato, Brazilian law authorities and Brazilian people are facing this challenge. I think it's impossible to extract some lessons from this giant criminal case, which could be useful in other scenarios. Maybe the case could also provide some good examples of good practice in facing systemic corruption. It's important to say since the beginning that Lava Jato operation is not a single criminal case, but several. In this large criminal case, the federal prosecutors decided to pursue separate charges against dozens of defendants. So there is not a single accusation brought before Brazilian courts, but so far more than 50. There are cases still pending, but about 26 of them have already been tried. About 130 persons have been convicted for bribery and money laundering. All the reflections on these presentations are based in the cases already tried. There is not any comment by me about the cases that are waiting sentence. This remark is important because I am one of the judges who is responsible for the trial of these cases. The core of Lava Jato operation are the crimes committed in contracts of Petrobras. Petrobras, to those who don't know, is a Brazilian company responsible for the exploration of oil and gas. It's Brazilian's largest company and one of the world's major oil and gas companies. It's a state-owned company. Its major shareholder is the federal government. It was founded in 1953 with the purpose to explore Brazilian fields of oil and gas and turn Brazil self-sufficient in the production of oil and gas. However, as the cases already tried reveal, multiple bribes were paid in contracts between Petrobras and its suppliers, and they were used for the criminal enrichment of Petrobras executives and politicians, and also for illegal financing electoral campaigns. As it usually happens in criminal investigation, Lava Jato started small. In the beginning, the federal police was investigating 4 individuals involved in what seemed to be, at that time, a money laundering crime and illegal financial operations in the money exchange black market in Brazil. One of these individuals, named Youssef, had connections with a former director of Petrobras, named Costa. The investigation, in the beginning, only revealed that Youssef bought a luxury car for Costa, concealing the origin of the resources he used. In March of 2014, the federal police, working with judicial warrants, made searches and seizures in the offices and houses of these 2 individuals. During these searches, Costa had tried to destroy or to hide paper evidence, so it was ordered his pretrial detention. Youssef was also arrested in pretrial detention for different reasons. Looking at bank records of Youssef Enterprise, the police and the prosecutors discovered that his accounts had received millions in credits from some of the biggest Brazilian construction companies, and these companies were also major suppliers of Petrobras. In another line of the investigation, it was discovered with the assistance of Switzerland authorities that Costa, the former director of Petrobras, had millions of dollars in offshore accounts in Swiss banks. Facing strong evidence and facing long prison terms, Youssef and Costa agreed in the second half of 2014 to make plea agreements with the prosecutors. And what they revealed in these plea agreements was very disturbing. They revealed, in summary, that as a rule, in every contract Petrobras have with top Brazilian companies, construction companies, these companies paid kickbacks of 1 or 2% of the total value of the contract. Youssef was in charge of the financial scheme. Costa received a share of the bribes, and they also stated that a share of the money, a share of the bribe, went to politicians, including congressmen of the Popular Party, which was part of the government ruling coalition. The Popular Party was in practice responsible for the nomination of Costa for his position in Petrobras. Youssef and Costa also revealed that other Petrobras officials had received bribes and had worked with middlemen and politicians of other parties of the governing coalition, such as the Workers' Party and the Party of the Brazilian Democratic Movement. They also revealed, that was very interesting, that the Brazilian construction companies who paid the bribes were also fixing between them Petrobras' bidding process. In resume, the major suppliers of Petrobras decided which one would win each Petrobras bidding process. So the chosen one could present a price proposition without real competition. They called themselves the club. The investigation continued to produce new evidence, including from plea agreements with other cooperating criminals. Of course, everything that a cooperating criminal says has to be supported by additional evidence. In that regard, there are a lot of investigations still underway. But it has been possible, in some cases, to get evidence which supports information revealed by cooperating criminals. Looking at only the cases already tried, there have been to date about 18 sentences which were specifically related to crimes of bribery in contracts involving Petrobras. In some of them, the individuals convicted were top executives of the biggest Brazilian construction company, acting as corruptors, top executives of Petrobras, acting as beneficiaries of the bribes, and as well as intermediaries between these two groups. 4 former directors of Petrobras have been convicted and sentenced to prison terms. 2 of those decide, after serving part of their prison sentence, to cooperate with the investigation. For all of them, the police and the prosecutors discovered that they all had offshore accounts with balance of millions of dollars or euros in countries such as Switzerland, Monaco, and Luxembourg, for example. In at least 5 cases, there were convictions of former federal legislators who had received bribes in the Petrobras scandal. In 3 other cases, it was proven that money from the bribes had been directed to illicit financing of political parties. The convictions included one of the former Speaker of the House. Again, with the assistance of Switzerland authorities, it was discovered that he had received about $1.5 million in offshore accounts in Swiss bank as a payment of bribes in a Petrobras contract. So far, also, dozens of executives of 9 Brazilian biggest construction companies have also been convicted as bribe givers. To illustrate the magnitude of this corrupt practice, a manager at Petrobras, after reaching a plea agreement with the authorities, agreed to return nearly $97 million in bribes that he had received from Petrobras contracts and kept in secret in offshore accounts abroad. In the beginning of the investigation, Petrobras assumed a posture of general denial. It did not recognize any problem in its contracts. But as the investigation developed, the company gradually started to admit that crimes were committed. This culminated in an official recognition in its 2015 annual report to shareholders of losses from corruption of nearly 6 billion reais, about $2 billion at actual exchange rate. It took time, but after a while, to their credit, some of the construction companies involved in the criminal scheme began also to recognize their responsibility. 3 of the largest Brazilian construction companies, Camargo Correia, Andrade Gutierrez, and Odebrecht, reached lenience deals with the prosecutors. They committed to review their illicit acts. They commit to abandon criminal practice, to implement efficient systems of compliance, and to compensate public coffers by returning billions of reais. The more troublesome aspect of the case was that it seems that the payment of bribes on Petrobras contracts was not an exception, but rather the rule. Some of the cooperating criminals used that word. They described the crimes they committed as, and now I'm quoting, a rule of the game in contracts of the public sector. End of the quote. Some of them stated that this criminal practice went beyond what happened with Petrobras and was used by other state-owned companies and in other branches of the government. There are ongoing investigations not only in the Federal Criminal Court of Curitiba, where the case started and where I am a judge, but in other Brazilian federal courts that received parts of the case. The ongoing cases involve charges of bribery against a former governor of the state of Rio de Janeiro, a former secretary of finance of the federal government, and even a former president. It's important to say that in Brazil, our Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over criminal charges against high federal authorities, for example, like the congressman. So all the evidence produced in these cases that involve federal congressmen is being sent to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court has this original jurisdiction. We call this stand privilege in Brazil as foro privilegiado. I have convicted some former congressmen because they received their bribes when they were congressmen, but after that they lost their position because they were not re-elected, and in some cases they lost their position because of a judgment of their peers, a political judgment. But to those who keep their position, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. So because of this foro privilegiado privilege, dozens of highly placed politicians, especially congressmen, are being investigated by the chief federal prosecutor before the Supreme Court. Some of them have been charged already. Some reflections about the cases already tried. The cases already tried allow us to conclude that an environment of systemic corruption was uncovered by an investigation. Corruption, as an isolated crime, exists all around the world, but systemic corruption, the payment of bribes as a rule of the game, isn't that common, and it represents a severe degeneration of public and private custom, especially in democratic nations. The costs of systemic corruption are enormous. First, the cost of the bribes that, for example, in this case involving Petrobras, were added to the contracts, affecting public budgets. If it's not an isolated practice, but a general rule, it affects severely the management of public resources. Remember the 6 billion reais that Petrobras recognized in 2015 as direct costs of the bribes paid. But moreover, the need to generate funds for bribes in systemic corruption schemes can affect investment decisions by public and private entities. Perhaps some bad investments made by Petrobras could be explained not simply as a result of bad judgment or unlucky choice, but instead as a deliberate choice by corrupted directors to generate bribes rather than make the best decision from an economic point of view. For example, there is one famous refinery in Brazil. It's called Abreu e Lima Refinery in the northeast in Brazil. In the beginning, Petrobras estimated the costs in $2.4 billion to construct this refinery. However, in 2015, Petrobras have already wasted $18.5 billion on the construction of the refinery, and only part of it was ready. Even if it worked for the rest of its useful life with full efficiency, there will be an impairment loss of $3.2 billion. This is official data. In the cases already tried, it was proved that bribes were paid in some construction contracts for this refinery, but the difference between 2.4 billion and 18.5 billion could not be explained only by the additional cost of the bribes. Very bad investment decisions were made, and probably one reason was that Petrobras executives were more concerned with bribes than with the company's best interests. Another detrimental effect of systemic corruption is that it chases away local and foreign investors. But above all, systemic corruption is damaging because it impacts the confidence in the rule of law and in democracy. If the law does not apply to everyone, if crime and cheating are the rule, there is a progressive erosion of trust in democracy. So, faced with a revelation of systemic corruption, what should be done? First, the judicial system must work. Crimes that are uncovered and proven, respecting due process, must be punished. Justice works when the innocent person goes home and the guilty person goes to prison. The outcome should not depend on the economic or political conditions of the defendant. And there is still much to be done to advance in this respect in Brazil. The adequate functioning of the criminal justice system is a necessary, though not a sufficient condition to eliminate systemic corruption. It's necessary that other public institutions, the executive and the legislative branches of government, adopt public policies aimed at preventing and combating corruption. Systemic corruption is not and cannot be a problem only for the judiciary branch. Freedom of press and access to information is also essential. The control of those who govern by the governed, demands citizens that are well informed about the management of public life. In Lava Jato operation, once the investigation of a singular case was finished, everything, the prosecution, the evidence, the hearing of the witness, the judgment and the sentence has been conducted under the light of the sun. The Brazilian Constitution requires that the judicial process be open to public scrutiny. There is no possibility to have cases prosecuted and tried in secret in Brazil. This was very important for the Lava Jato operation. Turning every evidence public was important to gain the necessary popular support for the enforcement of the law and to prevent any attempt by powerful defendants to obstruct justice. Of course, no judge will try a case based in public opinion. The judge has to try the case based in the law and the evidence. But public opinion in cases involving powerful people is important, and it was important in Brazil, as I said, to prevent any kind of obstruction of justice by these powerful people. Okay? Let me clear this remark. In fight systemic corruption, private sector initiative has also a relevant role. Corruption involves those who make illicit payments and those who receive them. Both are guilty. So companies must do their homework, saying no to the payment of bribes, implementing mechanisms of internal control, and denouncing requests or demands for payment of bribes. I think it's also important to act collectively so that companies involved in corrupt practice are identified and isolated from the market and not allowed to assume preeminent position. Perhaps more than any other case in the past, because of the dimension of the crimes that have been uncovered, Lava Jato operation provides Brazil with the opportunity to take the necessary steps to overcome this shameful practice. It's important to keep in mind that systemic corruption is a product of institutional and cultural weakness. No country is predestined to live with systemic corruption, since it's not natural, of course. Discovering and revealing it, even if it generates impacts on the short term, is not part of the problem, it's rather part of the cure. It's too soon by now to say whether that will happen, if we will be able to reduce systemic corruption, or if systemic corruption will be contained to more reasonable size in Brazil. It's difficult to make predictions. And of course, there have been reactions to Lava Jato operation. These have come especially from some of the companies involved and from some politicians. Some critics complained that Lava Jato operation is not impartial and has been used to play politics. That's not right. Of course, if the crime involves bribes, paid to politicians, the case will inevitably have political consequence. But this happened outside the court, and the judge does not have any responsibility or control of it. Some critics say that Lava Jato operation represents the criminalization of politics. But this is kind of obvious. The blame should not be aimed at the judicial process, but rather at the politicians who committed the crimes. The judicial process is just a consequence. The judiciary system could not and cannot turn a blind eye in the face of these crimes. Some critics also say that due process not being respected. However, every aspect of this judicial process is being conducted in open court with the respect of the rights of the defense and based in extensive evidence obtained, processed, and publicized under the law. Lava Jato is not a witch hunt. The problem is that the evidence of corruption revealed by the investigation was so widespread that the case took giant proportions, with numerous convictions and detentions. But nobody is being charged or convicted based in political opinion, but on bribery charges. There have been some questions about the use of pretrial detention in Lava Jato operation. Pretrial detention should be, of course, exceptions and not the rule in any judicial system, the democratic ones, of course. However, the judge in Brazil can order a pretrial detention if the defendant presents a danger to other individuals or to society, or if there is a risk that the defendant will flee or obstruct justice. There are similar rules in US law, for example. The US Criminal Code allows a judge to deny bail if there are similar risks. This is in Title 18, Section 3142 of the US Federal Code. The US Supreme Court ruled in a case named United States versus Salerno, a 1987 case, that this statute was constitutional. In Lava Jato operation, pretrial detentions were ordered only in cases where there was strong evidence against the defendant. They are used in some cases where there was a risk that the defendant would flee or obstruct justice. But also it was ordered to prevent the practice of new crimes by the defendants. It's important to understand that systemic corruption involved the practice of these crimes in a professional and serial way. For example, just to illustrate, one of the enterprises involved in this criminal behavior had a specific sector just to pay bribes, and it worked for several years, and even during the investigation. It stopped working only when the top executives of this enterprise have been arrested by a pretrial detention order. Because of the presumption of innocence, pretrial detention should be exceptional. But the scenario of systemic corruption is also exceptional and sometimes demands strong and urgent measures by the courts of justice. Also, there are some complaints against the large use of plea agreements in the investigation. However, crimes like corruption are committed in secret, and usually only criminals themselves could be used as witnesses of their wrongdoing. Sometimes it's necessary to make a deal with a criminal to get the bigger one, to get the chief, or to have a good criminal case against a lot of them. As stated by a famous US federal appeal judge named Stephen Trott, and now I'm quoting, "Otherwise, the big fish go free and all you get are the minnows." ending quote. It makes sense to have a plea agreement, for example, with the criminal responsible for the money laundering scheme to get evidence against bribe takers and bribe givers who are the main responsibles for the system corruption environment. Coming to the end, let me say that until now, the police, prosecutors, and the judiciary have been the main protagonists in Brazil's efforts against system corruption. So far, the executive branch and the Congress had made no significant contribution in Brazil's efforts against corruption. For example, they could do so by proposing and approving better laws to prevent corruption. For example, changing the electoral system, who sometimes some people understand that acts like an incentive for this kind of criminal scheme. They could also help efforts of the law enforcement agents in other ways. And unfortunately, there are some signs of reaction against the Lava Jato operation by the Congress. In 2016, the federal prosecutors presented a bill with major popular support to improve laws against corruption. Despite the popular support, the House rejected the most part of the propositions. This could still change, but it's very uncertain if the bill will be approved. What is more disturbing was an apparent attempt in the House to approve an amnesty bill for illegal electoral donations and even for bribery in cases that the bribes were paid in the form of electoral donations. But it was only an apparent attempt. I'm not so sure about this. In another controversial act, the Senate tried to approve a new bill about abuses of power committed by judges, prosecutors, and policemen. Of course, nobody defends abuses committed by any official authority, but the text of the bill could have a deterrence effect against the independence of the judiciary and the autonomy of the prosecutors and the police. It's still uncertain what will happen with the bill. To finish, it's possible to take some lessons from Brazil's situation. Years of weak enforcement of the law against crimes committed by high politicians and powerful businessmen have generated a free environment for the development of bribery, kickbacks, and corruption. Probably it was not the main reason, but it certainly did not help to prevent it. However, reality has presented Brazil with an opportunity to face system corruption. The system corruption uncovered in Brazil is shameful, but there is another way to look at this picture. The crimes are becoming known because of the efforts by many Brazilians to face and fight the problem. The police, the prosecutors, and the judiciary are serious dealing with it. And there is no shame in the enforcement of the law. I would like to quote the old president, Theodore Roosevelt. He made a speech in 1903 before the Congress, the US Congress. He spoke about a lot of issues, but about corruption. And I have a quotation, I think it's perfect. He said, and I'm quoting, "The exposure and the punishment of public corruption is an honor to a nation, not a disgrace." It is, of course, an ongoing investigation, But some of the results of the cases already tried have no precedent in Brazil. The country had several corruption scandals in its history, but never before top executives of the country's biggest construction companies were tried and convicted. Never before Lava Jato had a single director of Petrobras been charged with a crime. Today, there are 4 of them convicted and serving prison terms. 5 former federal congressmen have been convicted and arrested, including the former Speaker of the House. Several congressmen are being investigated and prosecuted before the Supreme Court, all of them for bribery and money laundering, and not because of their political opinions. This means, I understand, progress in the implementation of the rule of law in Brazil. Much more could be done, and it's too soon to say that Brazil will exchange its system of irresponsibility for one of effective accountability for crimes committed by powerful politicians and entrepreneurs. Despite of that, it is important to highlight that since 2015, millions of Brazilians protested in the streets against corruption. On March 13 of 2016, more than 3 million Brazilians occupied streets in several capitals and major cities of Brazil in peaceful demonstration. It's true that these demonstrations were motivated by many causes, like dissatisfaction with the state of the economy and with the former government. But it's also true that a common cause that united demonstrators and the country was to rally in protest against systemic corruption and in support of the Lava Jato operation. The fight against corruption has definitely entered in Brazil's public policy agenda, and it will influence political debates for years to come. Hopefully, some years from now, it will be possible to look back and say that Lava Jato operation helped to make the economy, the rule of law, and democracy stronger in Brazil. Maybe it will be possible to say that systemic corruption was overcome and became a sad memory of the Brazilian past. Obviously, it's not possible to take this for granted, but there is some hope, and that's what matters. Thank you all for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for that, and again, coming to speak here this afternoon. The outline you gave of the Operation Car Wash, as it's called in the UK, showed unprecedented collusion between all sorts of different actors, state-owned enterprises and in the political sphere. What do you think needs to happen to restore the confidence of Brazilian people? You know, these 3 million people on the streets angry. What will need to be done to restore this complete betrayal of their confidence in the state, in government organs?
I understand that the judicial process have to work, and so these crimes that are revealed and proved by due process, they need an answer, institutional answer. But it's not enough. You have, we need general reform, Brazilian law, involving, for example, the bidding process, contracts, the electoral process. I think sometimes there is, and I'm not criticizing any politician in special, but sometimes I feel that there is a lack of leadership in this issue in the political world. It was important that we have political leaders in the executive and the Congress trying to do some kind of reform, with general rules, to improve Brazilian system and prevent that these facts could be came again in the future.
So one thing that's obviously important here is the political will, and you ended your speech on a very optimistic tone, looking forward to the future of Brazil. What do you think is needed, though, for this culture change? Obviously, this unanimous political will to reform the way contracts are, given out, to reform the way in which political corruption is treated, that's not there yet. What needs to change for that to happen?
Well, that's a difficult question. As I said, I have hope. I think millions of Brazilians went to the street protesting. So it seems that there is a growing consensus that this practice, this system corruption, is unacceptable. Okay, but so far I think the political world is not exactly reflecting this consensus in the public opinion in civil society. I hope that in the future we have more politicians answering these requests. But one thing that is very important, I think you could see some signs in the private sector of these companies that maybe they will change by themselves their behavior. For example, as I said, some of the companies, and this was unprecedented in Brazil, they finally, after a long time, decide to make lenient deals and recognize their faults. For example, two of them, they publicize announcements in the biggest magazines and journals in Brazil apologizing for their crimes. And also, there's some examples of other companies not involved in this criminal scheme that recently they report to the authorities, to the legal authorities, attempts of official authorities who asked bribes for them. So maybe there is a change in the private sector more quickly than in the political environment.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, we've got an opportunity to take some questions from the audience now. So if you would like to offer a question, please put your hand up. And if you're selected, please wait for the microphone to reach you. It's a recording microphone, so it will not amplify you, but it's here for the video. Let's go to the gentleman right next to the fireplace over there, please.
So my name is Thiago, and I'm from Curitiba. I'm a doctoral candidate in law at the University of Oxford. First of all, congratulations for your work and for your talk. You're doing an excellent work in Brazil. I would like to ask you about the controversial releasing of tapped phone calls between Dilma and Lula. And as a lawyer, I would like to know how, in an increasingly politically divided country, how do you balance principles of open justice, like you mentioned before, against countervailing interests such as the right to fair trial?
Answer.
Yeah.
Well, about that tapes, let me say something. There are pending cases that I cannot talk about, okay? But about this fact, there was a conversation between the former president and former President Dilma and the former President Inácio Lula da Silva. And there are a lot of concern about the object of that conversation because Dilma was nominating the former President Lula to a high position in the federal government. And in other way, and I stated this in information that I sent to the Supreme Court about the releasing of these tapes. And he was saying things like he would try to obstruct the work of the investigation. And all I did, I thought it was important to reveal to the public what was going on. I do all this to protect the case, not with any kind of political purpose. So I can say that because I send information about that in detail, and in this information it's a public document. I put there the details, what he was saying about the case, what he was saying that he would do, and I thought at that moment that there was some danger to the rule of law, and I thought it was the best decision to make the tapes public, okay? And that generated a lot of questions and critics. But as I said in my presentation, since the beginning, our option was to bring every evidence to the public, so the public could do their judgment about what was going on. And we did that, not only my decision, but I answered a request from the federal prosecutors to protect the case, in my opinion. And about your other question, I said something about this. The problem is when you have in the judicial process crimes committed by politicians, and sometimes high ones, it's inevitable to have political consequences. And sometimes the defendants, they know that, and sometimes they try to use this consequence as a kind of protection, let me say, playing the political card. I saw recently very interesting series about O.J. Simpson, the people versus O.J. Simpson, and the defense, they say that they play that racial card. I'll say the same thing. Sometimes they play the political card. But as I said, this happens outside of the court. And what the judge could do, he has to do his job. So try the case under the law and looking for the evidence. What happens outside, it's none of my business.
Okay, great. Let's take another question. Yeah, let's go to the lady on the front row here.
Hi, I'm Camila, I'm also from Curitiba. And you mentioned in your talk how corruption was part of the rule of the game. And I think everybody that's lived in Brazil will know how corruption is just or was culturally accepted. So what made you want to fight it or think that you could win the fight against corruption when you started it all?
Well, this is an interesting question. I would say, as I said earlier, so far so good. We don't know the end of this story. But when the case started, as I said, it started small. So I think I start my job with a criminal case that was important, but not so big. And I could not make any predictions about the size of the case now, for example, or last year. So I work day by day and try to do my job. And sometimes I am also surprised about what have been done until now, because in the past, what we have in Brazil was the weak enforcement of the law against these kinds of crimes, with some exceptions. For example, we have a famous case that was tried by our Supreme Court in 2012. It's called the Mensalon case. We call technically criminal case 470. But that was exception. And we don't know now if we are living exception or things really change. I hope that things really change, but I'm not sure about that until now. But as I said to you, we never have expectation in the beginning that the case would be so big.
Great. Let's have another question. Yep, go to the gentleman in the middle, the end of the row there.
Hi, Judge. I'm Gustavo. I'm also Brazilian. I'm a student here at the University of Oxford. I have two related questions. First, the operation hasn't really touched yet two very important and sensitive sectors. That is the justice system itself and the financial sector. In the case that happens, how do you think that would change the operation? And the other question is, how does the car wash Lava Jato operation is different from the Manipulita or Mãos Limpas operation that took place in Italy in the 90s? And what we can do so that the car wash doesn't take the same direction that Manipulita took?
I'll start answering by your second question. I think Manipulita operation is a great example because, and they have similar points with the case in Brazil. The numbers of Manipulita are higher than in Lava Jato operation, but it was a great case. But it also shows that, as I said, the judicial process is not enough to eliminate systemic corruption. You need the public opinion, you need the civil society, and you need the political system working together to eliminate systemic corruption. And what happens in Italy, that operation started about in February of 1992. It was very big. Same thing, the judges and the prosecutors and the police, they did a fantastic job, even better than maybe than in Lava Jato. And, but suddenly, about 1994, the political system started to strike back. So, for example, they approved a law. No, the executive, the prime minister, he issued a decree stating, for example, that you could not have pretrial detention in corruption cases. And suddenly, everybody who was in jail because of these charges was free to go. Some days after, the reaction of the public opinion was so strong that they did not transform the decree in law. But the damage was already done because everybody understands after that the government was against the investigation and the case. And in the years which came, they started to approve a lot of laws reducing sanctions or turning some conducts, criminal conducts, in illegal conducts, but not criminal. And all the expectation generated by Manipulita did not prevail. And it shows that it's important not to rely only in the judicial process. the democratic institutions have to work together to build a more strong society, a more strong democracy, a more strong economy, and eliminate systemic corruption. And about your other question, what will happen when we reach the financial system? I'm not sure if we will reach the financial system. There is a lot of speculation. But if it happens, my answer is that we work day by day. Okay, let's think small and don't. It's not good to make predictions about the future to come.
Thank you. Let's take another. We've got time for 2 more questions. If we go to the hand at the very back of the room, by the lamp, yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. And my question is about the international implication of the case in Brazil. Because we can see right now, especially earlier this year, that several Peruvian ex-presidents were already under investigation in relation to the Brazilian companies. So that what is your view on this? Apparently right now the case is not only limited to Brazil anymore. And what is your view on your, in a way, transnational legacy of your case? Thank you.
Well, this is a very interesting question. We have in Latin America region, we have a lot of similarities, common institutions, common grounds, and we have sometimes the same problems. It's not, I cannot answer as an authority over these countries. I don't know details. But everybody usually thinks that Latin America have big problems with corruption. It's not only the case of Brazil, but these other countries. And in the development of the case, it seems that some of Brazilian companies who paid bribes in Brazil also paid bribes in another countries in Latin America. Like, for example, as you said, Peru, maybe Argentina, maybe some other countries. And it will be an interesting experience to see how the institutions of all these countries will react facing this kind of evidence. By the part of Brazilian authorities, our politic is to cooperate. In this world, in this small world, in globalization times, the countries have to cooperate with each other to have good criminal cases involving international crimes, like, for example, bribes being paid in another country, or money laundering being done in other countries. So our politics is that if we receive the requests, we'll share the evidence, and even maybe without receiving the request, we'll send the evidence. But of course, it will depend what the institutions of these countries will do with the evidence. I have been in the last 2 months for conference in Peru and in Argentina, and my impression was that in both countries they were very interested in doing the right thing. And it was a kind of strange, because they not only want to discuss sometimes the case, but the questions was, wow, how you did that? How you, the prosecutors, the police, how Brazil is getting success in facing systemic corruption. It was very interesting. So I think there is hope for all Latin America region, but it's too soon to say what will happen in each country.
Great. We've got time for one final question. So Okay, let's go to the hand in the middle bank over there. Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. My name is Fernanda. I would like to thank you for the presentation, for being here today. I'm Brazilian, and as all of us here today, we are very interested in the respect of rule of law, and that institutions, Brazilian institutions, could keep their strength, even though all the crises we are dealing with nowadays. And my question here is related to the fact that we are observing a systemic corruption in the country. And isn't it maybe that we might not have talked enough about the lobby, how the lobby should be regulated? Because it is not normal that a company could give a bribe to both sides for all the parties. And this is not even being talked about. We are just searching for those who might be the ones with fault, but not the system itself. So I'd like if you could talk a little bit about the lack of law on lobby.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I think the lobby is there, and it's better to get it out of the shadows and regulate than let it works without any kind of supervision. And but it's important to discuss how we will regulate this kind of professional conduct, because there is a lobby that is not criminal. This is kind of obvious. The problem is in this Petrobras case is that a lot of people who call themselves lobbyists were in true middlemen between the companies and the directors of Petrobras, and they act as intermediaries of bribes, and also sometimes helping the company and sometimes even the directors to conceal and disguise the bribes they received. So that was definitely not lobby, but I totally agree with your remarks.
Great, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for this afternoon. So I could ask you to please remain seated while the speaker leaves the room. And I know Dr. Moro has got to go back to Brazil now, where there's plenty of work waiting for you. But please join me in thanking Dr. Moro for visiting the Oxford University.